and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And a little change of plans. We had scheduling issues, so Jose Alay and Leslie Kane will not be on the show this week. Perhaps next week they will. But for right now, we have Marc D'Antonio is going to be on. Always enjoy speaking to him. He's going to be our guest this evening. And before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news in just a minute. And I want to thank everyone that supports the show. If you'd like to help us out for only $2 or more a month, you can listen to the full shows on your media player. And all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com and you will see that information on the top. If you can't support the show and you still want to listen to the full show for free, you can always go to podcastufo.com every Wednesday at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Or you can go on the Dark Matter Digital Network the following day, Thursday, to listen to it as a podcast. And that's from 10 to midnight. All right, so that's it for me. How you doing, Alejandro?
I am good. How are you?
Great. It looks like your website's full of some juicy stories.
Yeah. But did I hear you say that you're going to have Marc D'Antonio on?
Yes.
The Marc D'Antonio, the guy on TV.
The one and only.
That guy's amazing.
He is.
He's so dreamy. Have you met him?
Only in my mind. Yes, I've met him.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, he's a great guy.
Ooh.
He's going to love he's going to love hearing this. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I hopefully he doesn't figure out that my crush on him.
Oh, the man crush.
He might already know, though.
Oh,
yeah.
no. Yeah.
I think the rumor's been going around.
Well, how could you not?
I hear you.
Yeah.
So it's a bummer you're not going to have Leslie and Jose on, but in fact, because I just had him on recently, it might be a good thing. Actually, this is kind of exciting. I'm kind of glad for you because I know they're coming up with a response to some of the criticism they've gotten or feedback. So you could be the first person that they give their response, at least verbally to on a podcast. So that might be exciting.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I'm on the edge of my seat. I really am curious to hear the response to some of what's been going around. So, yeah, exciting. I'm excited.
Right. So what is going on in the UFO news this week?
First time I've been excited for one of your shows. No, there are a couple cool photograph cases going on. So the first one is Illinois. And this is a gentleman who said he saw 5 bright orbs. He saw them at about 5:30 p.m. on December 18th. He saw this essentially one point of light that he thought was just a star or something. But then he saw it start to flash and move. But then he thought it was a satellite, but he thought it was moving too quickly. And then he says, it looked like it was not just one object, but several objects, several small orbs. He said it broke up into 5 smaller orbs, and then it would reassemble itself into one bigger orb. And this happened for about 2 hours, and then it slowly disappeared behind the tree line of his house. Normally I would be like, well, maybe it was a planet or a star. It's just, what is it, parallax or something when, the air distorts it. You can ask Marc about this because Marc is super smart. He's like a genius. This guy, he may be able to tell you more about it. But he did take a couple pictures. He said he couldn't really zoom in. Of course, it's difficult to get pictures of a point of light. And a couple of these pictures do kind of support what he was saying. In one of these pictures, it does look like several objects, and then in another it looks like one single point of light. MUFON investigated this. Of course, this is a MUFON case. It was submitted by Roger Marsh of MUFON to Open Minds. He says the state section director, James Wolford, investigated and closed it as an unknown. Mr. Wolford said, the complex structure and behavior of the object rules out natural phenomena. This was something artificial with technology that may be beyond man-made construction. My disposition for this case is unknown other.
Yeah.
So often, with these cases where they said it moved really slow and it went over that's the case. It's some sort of celestial object. Mm-hmm. But the pictures, it is kind of strange that it took these, and it might be parallax or some other scientific phenomena regard that happens with the lens of the camera that Mark would know best about. But interesting.
So what else is happening?
Yeah, there's another story about a starfish in Tucson. And that's weird because there's no ocean in Tucson. Plus, this thing looks silvery, and it's flying in the sky. It's exciting, right?
Wow.
I was hoping you'd have some sort of reaction. Like, whoa,
yes,
wow, that's crazy. You're just a mellow dude, though.
Yeah, well, I am today.
Yeah, okay. Well, I haven't heard you ever do, like, some expression of exclamation like, whoa, Let's hear one. Do one.
I think I might be a little boring. I never really thought about it. Wow.
Let's pretend. This next story is about a starfish caught on camera in the sky over Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, come on. Really?
That was a good one. Okay. That was great. That was really cool. That's more fun. There we go. We added some energy there. That was awesome. So, yeah, really, I'm not even kidding, Martin. This was at 11:30 a.m. on December 18th, and this thing is a daytime sighting, which is always exciting. This person felt that the object was at 5,000 to 10,000 feet. And he got some pretty good pictures, some high-resolution pictures, and you do see this starfish object. A lot of people are assuming it's a drone, and it could be, but, people like Robert Schaefer, the skeptic,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Bless his heart. Bless his little pea-picking heart is what one of my friends used to say. But it doesn't fit, the drones that he said it obviously was. But it could be a drone because it does have, these 5 kind of appendages with something at the end. But it is not, obvious what it is. So it's kind of strange. This person was able to catch pictures with their SLR camera with a telephoto lens. And he said it disappeared from view pretty quickly. The sighting took about place for over about 15 minutes. And so it's pretty cool. Now, this did happen in Arizona. And I must say that in Arizona, we have one of the best directors of investigation out here.
Really?
The chief investigator out here, Dennis, is amazing. I mean, he owns a video company where he does weddings and events, special events and stuff like that. So he's really familiar with photographs, and if he can't debunk it, then it's significant. Now, this has not gone through the total investigation. A local investigator named Diane Gleason, who's out there in Tucson, is going to be investigating this. So, and even the state director, when I posted this, said, hey, we haven't even investigated that yet. And I said, I know. Roger puts that in the story. In fact, Roger puts in every story this sentence, please remember that most UFO sightings can be explained as something natural or man-made. So this one, we don't know what it is yet, but it's pretty interesting. But I'm excited because Dennis, out here, I'm just a huge fan. He's so good. In fact, we've written some stories on some bigger sightings that he's been able to figure out what they were by doing some really great work. So I'm interested to hear that the local MUFON meeting is this weekend. They're going to have David Hatcher Childress there, so I'll probably go and see some of those people and see if Dennis has any more information. But interesting case. I guess it could be. It doesn't look like a star balloon necessarily.
I was just going to ask you about that, if it could be a balloon.
But it could be a balloon of some sort. Yeah, it could be a Mylar balloon of some sort, some kind of other strange or fun shape. So we'll have to see on that one. But that's the news for now, buddy.
Well, it would be a really weird shape, that's for sure. And I suggest the listener check it out. You can see in the show notes, it'll pop you right over to openminds.tv. And so, hey, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. And
no problem. And in the future, we should make that a thing where when I do a headline, like you go, whoa, or something, because that was a lot of fun. You're good at it.
Okay, I'll try to be less boring.
To working on the UFO Congress, because that's in just a few weeks, and I'm just, up to my neck in preparations for it. So that's where I better get back to. But
I'm really excited. And just to let the listener know, I will be doing another show live from there, as I've done the last couple of years. And
whoa!
And who knows? I've passed along some invitations to people like Dave Marler and a few others that are going to be there. And so anyway, that's it for now. So thanks, Alejandro, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you later.
Everyone hang in there. After this quick music break, we'll be right back with Marc D'Antonio. I don't know. I just like that tune. That's from Kerry Lloyd Whitehouse. Does music for the show. He's in Ireland. And Marc D'Antonio, you should be on the line. Are you there?
I am absolutely here.
Hey.
How are you, Martin?
How are you?
Great, thanks.
Did I just see a text from you that is a Mylar balloon?
Well, I said that, in my opinion, based on what I saw for the photos and based on the email that I just sent you, I show an object that looks remarkably like that. So I'm guessing it could very well be a Mylar balloon. But, we have to let Diane Gleason and Dennis Frymouth look at it and do their own diligence.
Right.
But it's a photo case, and in a photo case, I typically look at the photo data. So that was my opinion.
Yeah. Well, let's for the new listener that does not know who the heck you are, why don't you just quickly give a nutshell bio, and also including what you do for MUFON and all that.
Oh, sure. I'm an astronomer. That's what I went to school for. I mean, why not go to school for something you can't get a job in, right? And before I actually got out of school, I started working in my degree. I actually got a job working in astronomy, and I was actually doing a lot of nighttime photos and so forth. I was teaching a lot of astronomy as well. But then I ended up starting my own business several years later. I had done a stint in the computer industry because where do you go with astronomy but computational science? You want to compute what that star is going to do in 10,000 years, or you want to gauge the progress and evolution of a star, then you would actually do it computationally. You would write a program. So I ended up doing a lot of programming and did that for probably close to 15 years. Then I got sick of that because I was doing everybody else's stuff but my own. So I ended up leaving that, started my own business, FX Models, which is a visual effects company that does a lot of miniatures for movies and special effects for television and so forth. And it's a small company, but, I wanted to do that because I thought it was important. And then several years ago, I ended up getting this long-term contract to build giant planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. And these are giant planets that hang inside buildings that are being built new all over the United States. So they asked me if I could make planets, and I almost said no because I had done them before, and it was a pain. So I tried to talk them out of it, and I said, "Well, just how many sets of planets do you need? Like 2, 3?" And he said, "No, 200." And I went, "Yeah, I can do it." And then I got off the phone and said, "Okay, now I got to figure out how to do it," which I did. And so I started doing that. And so basically, I'm like Slarty Bartfast from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? I build planets. And so I have a team out in Colorado that is wonderful. They do a lot of the work, and I do a lot of the contract stuff at my end. And that gives me time to do what I do for MUFON and do my own astronomical research. So MUFON is a wonderful organization, the Mutual UFO Network, and I do, in a capacity there, I'm their chief photo and video analyst. So if there's a photo case or a video case, I look at it, and I try to decipher what I'm looking at in terms of a real thing. Now, the charter of MUFON, as you already know, is the scientific investigation of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. And I don't leave the word scientific out of that whole thing. You've got to leave that in there. So I use science first and foremost to try and figure out what these might be. There's atmospheric illusions. There's stars and planets. There's misidentified objects on still frames like film, you get a photograph. And there's all kinds of things that are sometimes thought to be UFOs. And your first opinion is sometimes not the right one, like with this starfish. To me, it looked like a silver mylar balloon, which you mentioned and which Alejandro even mentioned. And so I thought it was. But, you got to do the diligence. That's also my opinion, but I don't know for sure. And I'll let them go through it. If there's more photos, we'll see them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, there hasn't been a whole bunch of things that you've analyzed that you actually say, wow, this is really, there is no explanation. I mean, you usually do figure something out.
Well, I err on the side of caution, and I err on the side of science. If there's something that can reasonably, and I mean closely, fit the circumstances of a sighting, then I have to err on the side of saying, well, maybe this is it, And there was a cool case and I think it was in Utah, where a pilot was flying a commercial airliner. And pilots are observers, but they're not astronomers, and they're not specialists in certain ground objects that they might see. They don't know exactly what they're looking at. And pilots have been fooled by the planet Jupiter, for instance, thinking it was an aircraft following them closely, but it wasn't. It was just Jupiter. So there have been cases like that. But in Utah, there was a sighting where there was a strange square, this bright orange square seen on the ground by airline pilots. And they reported this strange square seemed to be pacing them, and they weren't sure what it was. And I never found out exactly what it was. I thought, based on the map and looking over Google Earth and checking out the nearby facilities, I was thinking that maybe, as other people did, that it was a well-lit facility on the ground of some sort. And there was a well-lit facility on the ground, but since when do pilots mistake a well-lit facility on the ground for something that's in the air? So there's the question there. So although I haven't often found something that I couldn't figure out, and I don't need to make myself feel whole. Okay, if I don't figure it out, I'm okay with that. That's what I want. That's like a doctor constantly working to put himself out of a job, right? To cure a disease. Well, I'm willing to be shown that I can't see, that I don't understand something. I'm very happy to admit defeat if I can't figure something out, because I have no ego to bruise. I don't care. I'm just trying to get a good scientific method involved in trying to decipher what these things are. So
Now, are there old cases that you are interested in with images that you can't figure out?
Old cases. Well,
and I can be specific. The one in Oregon,
McMinnville. You were going to say McMinnville, weren't you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I looked at McMinnville, and I did it sort of as a hobby. I didn't try to make a serious stab at McMinnville because it's past history, and quite frankly, I focus on current cases, that utilize current potential technology to try and fool us. All right, such as good CG, computer graphics, computer-generated imagery, for instance, or nice model making, for instance, because I'm a professional model maker. I do those exact kind of models. So looking at McMinnville is looking at history, and it's sort of as a hobby thing. I have looked at it, and what's interesting is that the IPACO people in France, headed by Francois Louange, they looked at the McMinnville case, and I looked at their analysis, and their software was able to detect a potential, not definite, but definitively, a potential line connecting the UFO object in the so-called sky with a wire above that was going from one building to another on the property. And they did this through a special process that looked at the light levels across the image, and they found that the light level would go up and down, up and down, up and down. But there was a dip that occurred at one particular area crossing the image, and then they would go down a row and do the same analysis, go down a row, do the same analysis, and it looked as if those dips coincided. There was a lot of dips all over the place, but there was one set of dips that went from the line down to the UFO. They were rather well placed underneath each other. And that's pretty coincidental. Now, that could have been the shadow of a contrail from a high-flying prop plane of that era, and that's a possibility of what that was. But it did coincide with this really interesting-looking knot that was on the wire overhead, and it went straight down to the UFO. It didn't go to just the side or one side or the other. It was right down to the UFO. So that to me is interesting science being done. So for McMinnville, for instance, that means the jury is still out for me. Mm-hmm. And the Heflin UFO is another one. That one throughout the years, that was the one that looks like the top hat UFO photographed out of the
pickup truck.
Yes, the pickup truck. Yeah, that one was an interesting case for me because I didn't necessarily buy Rex Heflin's account of what was going on. Because I felt that based on the way that day was, that his camera probably wouldn't have been able to take a picture of the UFO object that was supposedly that far away without more atmosphere causing a problem for the camera. That is to say, more atmospheric haze and stuff that would cause the thing to look a little bit less defined. And I didn't see that in the images, so I don't know. I mean, I've seen all kinds of theories. So, and that's about the extent to my historical issues diving in with these cases. And you can easily get lost. It's a rabbit hole, So I prefer to look at current science and talk about modern sightings in terms of what we understand about exoplanets, planets around other stars. Exoplanets are my specialty. That's what I do in astronomy. That's where I go. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at these, and I'm looking at what we can look at and how we can better. What's the word? How we can better actually explain the potential science that an alien race might be using to be here from, say, this particular planet. And we've found some very interesting exoplanets around other stars.
Right. And I think there's some recent news about a couple things going on in that respect. And by the way, just heard static go over the line, and I wanted to apologize to the listener and also say that I have figured out what that is. It's my mixing board, and a new one's on the way. I'll have it by next week. So You shouldn't be listening to that anymore.
Oh, I didn't hear it.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. Well,
no, I didn't, but that's just,
All right. Well, a question that came in today when I posted you on the website. Let's see. You are so well respected in the UFO community with your photographic and analysis skills. Are there any famous cases with film photographic evidence that you would love to analyze? It's kind of like what I just asked you, isn't it?
Yeah, but there is another one, though, that I didn't talk about.
Okay.
And so that's a very, very good question, and I thank the person who sent that in. In Montana, I can't remember, was it 1959 or 53? I can't remember. A father was visiting a baseball stadium with his daughter, and he had a 16 millimeter or 8 millimeter camera. I think it was 16, and he was just taking some film. And as he was turning, these white objects, these bright white objects, entered the field of view and went behind all the building structures in the stadium at an extremely high rate of speed. And they were not leaving any trails behind them, as I remember. And that case was fascinating to me because I looked at it, and even though you only see these for like 2 or 3 seconds.
I know which one you're talking about.
You are, yes. Mm-hmm. It was Montana, right? And,
yeah. Why was I thinking that had something to do with someone in the armed services taking that film? It had nothing to do with that. I might be confusing 2 different cases.
Maybe it's me that's confusing 2 different cases. So I haven't visited it in a while. But, I'm older now. I'm losing my mind, as you know. So that case is interesting to me. And I'd love to be able to analyze the film, frame by frame of that actual movie that was taken just to see. And, of course, I would actually bring that film up to, who, Mr. Douglas Trumbull, I've been working with Doug for about 5 years now. And Doug is a virtual expert on all things acetate, all things on movie film. And so he would be able to figure it out with me, And we did that with Leslie Keene for one time. She came up and we looked at a case for her. So, it's interesting when you have film. There's certain people that are go-to people, If you can get the Bruce Maccabee, you do Bruce. He's a great guy. If you can do Doug, you do Doug. He's a great guy, So, there's a lot of experts out there for that kind of thing. But anytime we look at this footage now, it's been digitized. And we don't have access to the originals anymore. So there's only so much analysis you can do on these historical cases, unfortunately. And that's part of the problem that I faced. If you digitize something, you remove some of the dynamic range of the image. So if you digitize a photograph, say you scan a photo, that is right from the negative. Now that scan you just did is a level removed from the actual photo. Mm-hmm. But it's also losing a lot of the dynamic range. So in other words, details that might be hidden on a negative that you could coax out directly by using the negative are now forever lost in that snapshot of the negative of that negative that you took, because there's only so much range of contrast and other data on that negative that will come through on a digitization, a digital copy. And that's like what happens with moon photos that were taken with film magazines on the Apollo missions. All that footage, all those images were taken with like Hasselblad cameras, and they were film, acetate, and so to preserve them, they had to, make them digital so they would stick around forever. But the problem is, in so doing, those become lower quality, I should say. And they might be, say they're, big giant scans. It doesn't matter. They've still lost dynamic range. So the ability to tease something out of the darkness on a negative is lost to some extent when you digitize the negative and make it now a digital image. You don't carry all that subtle hidden data because of the scanner's limitations that's scanning the negative. So that makes it hard to do this kind of work with historic cases,
Right. Now, what about this question up on the message board is what about the Phoenix Lights? I know that a number of the films from the Phoenix Lights were actually the flares, but supposedly there are some films of the lights themselves that were not the flares that were taken earlier. Have you ever looked into any of those?
Yeah, well, Lynn Kitai has sat down with me, and we sat for several hours at one of the UFO congresses, and she was showing me image after image. You know how Lynn is; she's really very energetic about this and so forth. But I'm when it comes to looking at this, you can't shove data at me and expect me to make a pronouncement right there. And I hope it probably frustrated her a little that I didn't come out and say, yes, you're absolutely right, they're all UFOs, because I wasn't convinced. And I know I did a TV special. I can't remember if it was National Geographic or NASA's Unexplained Files that I did. So I do both of those. But the NASA's Unexplained Files or the other one, whatever it was, they asked me about the lights. And before I did my taping, Lynn called to ask me what I was going to say, and I was like, "Well, Lynn, I'm going to say what I feel, and I can't make any pronouncements." And she wasn't trying to get me to see it her way. She just wanted to know because they still had yet to tape with her, and she didn't want to say one thing if I was saying something else, and she wanted to, just know what's going on. So it's good to not be ambushed, and they love to ambush you like that. These companies. So I proceeded to look at the Phoenix Lights footage that the people gave me from the production, and this was the flare drop event. Clearly you could see it easily. The first one to be dropped was the first one to go out. Okay, because it lasted the longest, and they went out one after another, bum 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 bum, up the line, just like flares do. And I actually went to Arizona with a camera and with a night vision system. Actually about 4 years ago, and I went out into the desert for an evening, and I actually photographed flare drop exercises from the people training from Luke Air Force Base, and I saw a lot of similarities to what was seen by that flare drop exercise for the Phoenix Lights. So I was convinced that not all of it was Phoenix Lights, but that was definitely a flare drop that I saw. Okay, in that film footage. If there was other things, people said there was, this large object in the sky. You could see it. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any of that. I've never seen that footage. I haven't seen any footage that purports to be those things. And when people show me, well, this is the flare. This is the original Phoenix Lights here. They're showing the flare drop thing, which happened after or whatever. So I don't know what actually exists for the actual event that we're calling the Phoenix Lights, to be honest. I haven't seen that.
Well, I know I'm going to be seeing James Fox next month out in Phoenix, and he's going to have some of the original films that he's going to actually present there with some of the witnesses that took the films. So
yeah, that's fantastic. James is a good friend. I like him. So I think that, I think that his production of I Know What I Saw, these are important landmark productions.
Yes.
And I think that if anyone can figure it out, he can.
Yeah.
If he's got all the footage, that's great.
Yeah, Out of the Blue too. Great, both great movies.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there was another UFO question here, and that is, what's your opinion on the claims that NASA has airbrushed UFO craft from satellite imagery?
Except for seeing that on these certain YouTube sites that we blackball because we know they're hoaxers, I can't explain, or know whether anyone's really doing that or not. I do know that on many of the moon imagery, when I did that special Aliens on the Moon.
Oh yeah.
I know for a fact that that moon imagery, some of that moon imagery, was just, again, digital scans of the original film negatives. And you lost a lot of information, and people jumped to a bunch of conclusions because they couldn't see the rest of the story. So as far as the moon goes, I actually created a real, close to exact lunar soil. I studied the composition. I tried to figure out what was in it based on the science. And I've actually come up with, and I have a pile of it in my special effects shop. I've got a big vat, and it's called lunar soil. and it matches the static charge properties. It matches the glassy, properties, the sharp particle properties that are responsible for cutting the astronauts' spacesuits to the point where they couldn't go on some walks because the suits were almost destroyed by the lunar regolith, the soil.
Right.
And it matches the properties of clumping and does all the right things. So I could simulate crater making with this stuff. I could simulate all kinds of really cool lunar soil properties. And one thing I did was I used it to simulate some of these anomalies that people were seeing on the moon. One was, well, look, this is clearly a dome on the moon. Well, I made a dome in my lunar soil by pressing a hemisphere down into it and put the lighting a certain way, and for all the world, it looks like it's uplifted, sticking out of the soil. But if you just turn your head 180 degrees the other way, upside down and look at it, it's clearly an imprint. So part of it is an illusion. Okay, so those things are generally an illusion. I won't say that they're all an illusion because the jury is still out as to whether there's an alien presence on the moon for me. But then some of the other things that you see are like, for instance, there's a massive bridge connecting these two areas across a dark, yawning chasm. That massive bridge is something that I recreated. I recreated it using my lunar soil. And I did it by actually doing it in the way that I think it really happened. You see, as I said, when you digitize the images, you lose a lot of the dynamic range. So in the dark areas on this footage, on the negative, you might have been able to tease a little bit more information out of that dark shadow. But when you scan it, the scanner isn't going to see all that detail, and it's going to lose some. So this helps people generate those what I call, the fake news that there's a big bridge on the moon. So I created this big bridge by making two valleys, one valley with a ridge, and then go down into another valley with a ridge, and I made it long. So I had like about a 10-inch long furrow, in between of which was a ridge, and then another 10-inch long furrow. Then I put the light down low, and now the shadows in those valleys made the photos I took of the valleys. When you shoot for the gray of the bright moon surface, you meter it so that the exposure makes the bright moon surface look normal, like bright. Those shadows are all but gone. They're dark. They're black. And now you have your bridge, because it's actually the ridge makes the bridge. The ridge of this valley cuts across this big, giant, yawning chasm, and it looks like an illusion of this bridge. And that, I demonstrated that, and when I did that for the show, they looked at me and said, "Oh, that won't get in the show." It's like, oh, okay. So I knew what their agenda was when I figured that out, But so there's obviously those. So, but there's other mysteries on the moon, like the shard. There's a interesting photo. It's only one photo that shows this thing. It looks like this gigantic thing sticking off the moon. Now, to me, it looks like it could be some type of eruptive geyser, actually, caught in mid-expulsion. All right, but we know that the moon tectonically is dead. We know that the moon isn't at all spewing volcanic material of any kind.
Yeah.
So it's a true mystery. So that's something I don't understand. Now, could it be something on the actual film emulsion? Yes, but it certainly doesn't look that way. Okay, I'm fairly well versed at seeing anomalies on negatives because I've actually done an awful lot of negative work using negatives, and this doesn't look that way. However, I couldn't see the original negatives to know. I had to go based on the scan of the negatives. And again, we're at that problem I keep mentioning. Loss of dynamic range, loss of detail. You might say it that way. So if there's 10 levels of detail that you can see, 1 through 10, when you scan it, the amount of detail you get is like 3 through 8. And you miss the outer ones because it's compressing that data into less of a range. So that's a problem.
I want to stick on the moon for a while.
Okay, should I send you there?
I'm going to ask you some moon questions here.
Okay.
And someone just asked on the message board, what is your thoughts on a hollow moon? Now we have a call coming in, unfortunately. For some reason, I have not been able to figure this out. I'm not able to take that call, or it would hang up on the guest. So sorry. If you just try to make a call, please go to the chat room at podcastufo.com and type us your message if you would. What's your... I guess some people are theorizing. I know I've heard hollow Earth, and now I've never heard of hollow moon, but is that something you've heard of?
I have. And, it's kind of a... it's an interesting... I have to say it this way. It's sort of a fringe thinking. I personally don't believe that there's a hollow moon, nor do I believe there's a hollow Earth. The reason I don't is because we actually can test for this now. Seismically, we can actually create vibrations and send them down into the planet Earth, and we can actually map out the interior of the Earth with these vibrations based on the echo coming back. And it's a geology trick, and it's been in use for a fairly long time. And I would say that the most important thing for people to understand is that these indicate that there's no hollow Earth. This is how we made these discoveries, that the outer core of the Earth is actually liquid, the inner core is solid. Kind of goes the other way. And that has to do with the fact that the Earth has this magnetic field. The magnetic field is created by the outer core, molten, rubbing against the inner core, or that transition zone to the inner core. And this generates a charge, and that charge becomes this magnetic field on the sphere of the Earth. And so for the Earth anyway, we can see this. And on the moon, these same kind of experiments, although not nearly as complete, basically give us a rough idea of the interior. And there's a lot of theory, there's a lot of conjecture, but for the most part, we suspect that the moon inside is dead. There's no activity going on in there at all right now.
Right. Yeah, I thought so.
But that's just an opinion. That's an opinion, right? Obviously.
Right. And so there have been many people. Now, first of all, I want to start this out by saying that I do believe that we landed on the moon when we said we landed on the moon, and I believe that there are many, many, many people that are theorizing that didn't happen. And there was some type of rumor going around that Julian Assange was going to be releasing some WikiLeaks papers that was proof that we did not land on the moon, that it was all fake and all that. And I realized that, first of all, there were 20,000 or so people employed to make it happen. There's just so many reasons that I think it happened. Plus, can't you actually see the images of the landers?
Yeah, and this is something for your listeners to try. This is a really, really good site. If you go to something called QuickMap, all one word, QuickMap, QUICKMAP, and it's on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter website, okay, LROC, LRO2. When you go to the QuickMap, and if you look up LRO QuickMap, and you go to that site, you can actually go and zoom in to an unbelievable extent, right down to just a few meters, and see the details at most areas of that moon. Now, you can go to the Apollo sites and see the trails left by the rovers. You can see the descent stages. You can see the lunar experiments like ALSEP sitting on the moon. Okay, not in extreme detail. They're only tiny little pixels. But this gives you an idea of how small the human presence on the moon was. You can't use any telescope in Earth orbit to look at anything on the moon and see any detail, obviously. When you look at the LRO pictures, you'll see why. The biggest thing is the descent stage of the lunar module. That's the big flat base left behind with the legs on it that was left behind when the ascent stage took off and separated from it after the landing was concluded. Well, you can't even see that. And on the LRO images, you see it, but just barely. So when we look at the moon and we see the manned landing sites, you notice that we didn't really tear up the moon, and we didn't really do a whole lot. In fact, we didn't even go very far away from the lunar lander, except when we started using the rover. Mm-hmm. And then we still didn't go too far away. It's like going to the bottom of your driveway and then coming back. And that was a big jaunt for being on the moon.
Right. Well, there were some rumors that some of the astronauts that landed on the moon actually said that there was a presence there. And then I heard you say earlier that the jury was out for you. Is this kind of related? I mean, when you said the jury's out for you, what do you mean exactly?
Oh, I'd be happy to explain. You see, if I was an alien, I paused.
You are to someone, yeah. But, yeah
exactly. Yeah, to Alejandro, apparently I'm an alien. I got to be wary of him now. He's a good friend. If I was an alien and I was studying the civilization, the beings, the creatures that I found on Earth, I would find the moon to be a very convenient stopping off point, especially if I was an interstellar traveling being. I mean, the moon is a skip and a jump from the Earth, for an interstellar being that's capable of going interstellar. So I would basically put up a site saying that the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. That's like, whoa, I win, because only one side faces the Earth. So I could just put something just on the far side of the moon and then just whip on off to go to Earth and check things out when I want to and then come back. And look at that. Lo and behold, there's these big oceans on the Earth. And I can tell from observation that, these beings, these creatures don't even go in that. There's some of them that are in that, but they mostly travel on top of it. There's some underneath it, but they're very rare and very few and far between. So what the heck? I might as well just put some of our guys under there too. I'll have Jaime and Fritz and Bob, go dig down into that ocean and just sit on the bottom there. When they need something, they can come back to the moon, get their stuff, go to the soda machine, whatever. But they can just go down to the bottom of the ocean and be totally obscured and totally out of reach of the human population. So it's from a science perspective I look at this. I don't look at it and say, I believe that there are aliens on the moon. I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that if there was an alien race studying us, they would use the moon because that's what we would do if we could. And it's a perfect opportunity for them because it's, that thing is tidally locked. It only has the same face facing the Earth as it goes around.
Right.
And that means that the moon revolves once on its axis every time it goes around the Earth. Mm-hmm. And that's a concept that makes people's heads explode sometimes when they don't quite figure that out. But it's actually because of this tidal locking. And so that face facing the Earth means that the far side is basically off limits to us. We don't ever get to see it. Except we do have the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that's mapping the far side. We do have the Clementine, which mapped the far side. We do have other probes, and the Japanese and Chinese actually have probes that are on the surface. The Chinese have probes on the surface. The Japanese are mapping along with us.
Now, when you say, pardon me to interrupt.
Yeah.
When you say mapping, are you saying like going overhead and filming? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And how does that done on the dark side when there's just no light?
Well, that's the thing. The moon is always half lit, and the only reason we call it the dark side is because it's the opposite of the light side that we see. And when the moon is a crescent, all right, when we see a crescent moon, the other side, that's what we call a dark side, is also partially lit. Okay, so the far side craters are lit on that side. Mm-hmm. It's the near side, which is the normal face of the moon we understand, that's not lit. The moon is moving in an orbit around the Earth, and as it moves around the Earth, the sunlight changes. The vantage point of the sun on the moon changes where it hits in the shadows. Yeah. So anyway, we are mapping the moon now. The Japanese had the Kaguya probe that actually they blended a bunch of imagery together, and you can actually get models, and I get them. I have a USGS ID, United States Geological Survey ID, and I get onto their website, and I literally map a small square of the moon. I download it in a full 3D format, and I print it in a 3D printer right behind me here in the office. Wow. So I've got all these slabs of the lunar surface with craters at the exact way they look, and this is something that anybody could do if you have a 3D printer. So this kind of thing is available to us. That data is out there. Now, if there was some kind of facility on the far side of the moon. Well, I mean, somebody could find it and actually digitally print it if it was picked up by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiting Camera, LROC, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty cool. But, yeah, it's out for me. The jury's still out because I would do it if I could. And if there was somebody here looking at us, that's probably what they would do. And they'd use our oceans to hide, too, as well.
Yeah. And I know we can briefly talk, because the listener who has heard you on before, we can briefly talk about your USO experience. But sticking on the moon as we are right now, another thing, you just mentioned it's tidally locked. You know, the moon is here and the tides change and all that. Do you think life, if there would be life on Earth if the moon wasn't here, or do you think life would still be here and be very different if the moon wasn't here?
It might have taken longer to form because tidal pools, which form at the water's edge and are based on the location of the Earth and Sun and Moon. Right now, when the Moon is full and it's tugging on our ocean, which is basically it's a pliable, soft material to the Moon gravity, it's actually causing a bulge in the Earth. Well, the Sun is also causing that too on the opposite side. So when it's a full moon, the Moon is pretty much in line with the Sun to the Earth. So we have the highest tides of the month, right? Those are called the spring tides, and they have nothing to do with the spring. You and I talked about this earlier. And the neap tide is when the moon is 50, another quarter of the way around, and it's at 90 degrees to the Earth compared to the Sun. So the Sun, Moon, Earth, Sun, that triangle it's created will be like a right triangle. Those are the neap tides. That's sort of when the tides are less pronounced. But so we've been through that cycle billions of times with the moon. And it is true that with the moon's presence, we have the strongest tides at full moon. So we'd have the biggest change in water level at a full moon. And that happens twice a month or so. And we'd have that large exchange of dry land that had water on it, like 4 feet of water, now has nothing for a period of time. And then half a day later, it's got 4 feet of water again, and that goes on and on and on. So obviously that caused something to happen to the life forms that were dependent on those shorelines. Mm-hmm. Maybe a fish was exposed out of water, and over time, one fish was born with this weird adaptation to be able to temporarily breathe some air, extract oxygen from the air medium instead of the water medium. And that mutation meant that more fish like that, as he bred and mated with other fish that created such a fish later, these fish kept multiplying and were naturally selected to fill that little niche at the water's edge. And this is how evolution progresses, through a bunch of adaptations and mutation. So mutation and adaptation. So this happened many billions of times, and that's so the creatures at the water's edge began to be able to experience being out of the water for a period of time and then in the water. And that ability to go back and forth is what we think prompted the creatures at one point to actually leave the water for good. And you used to be in the water. You were a water being at one point along the evolutionary pathway, which is why the water level in you is saline. Okay, you're carrying a little vestigial ocean with you because you came from the water. You were an ocean creature at one point, and as we evolved away from the water, we had a skin that contained the salt we needed, as opposed to the water. So now we just walk around with a little ocean inside of us, which is kind of a neat little fact. So that's why you're salty.
Oh wow! I got a message in the message board that I'm going a little too Darwin here. So, but I do have one last moon question, and that's it. And that is, if we did not have a moon, everything in the universe, as far as I know, works off of gravity from the molecular level up.
Yeah.
So
true.
if we did not have a moon, would we still have tides based on gravity from other planets or even the sun? Would we have some type of tide movement?
We absolutely would. The tides would be from the sun, and very minimally from any other planets, but it would be primarily the sun. The sun is the biggest gravity well in our solar system, the biggest source of gravity. And I think that life could still persist and could still come about, albeit differently. Maybe the mutations that live out of the water would have meant that the range of the area where the water was evacuated during a low tide would be narrower, because it wouldn't be as deep a tide, as strong or as pronounced, wouldn't be to the extent that it is. So it might be more like it would have been neap tide, NEAP, the neap tide, when the moon is 90 degrees from the sun to us. And in that case, we still get tides from the moon, but they're much less. And so when we think about it, we could still have existed, because at any one point in the moon's orbit, as the moon is orbiting the Earth, the tide isn't drastic all the time, but we still get tides. And if the moon wasn't here, we'd still get tides. So it's possible that it might have taken a little longer for life at the water's edge to develop this way. But I still think it probably would have developed, because that is the direction that creatures went on this planet. And I think they would have gone there anyway. It just might have taken longer.
Right. So we probably ought to get back into the UFO field just a little bit here. Well,
we're speaking about UFOs. This is all about UFOs.
In a way, yes. But no, I want, if you would, just briefly explain, we're at the top of the first hour here, and explain the USO experience that you had to the, I know people have talked about it before. I mean, you have talked about it before in past shows, but I'd love to hear it one more time.
Well, I'll give you the 30-second version so as to, make it succinct. I was invited to go on a submarine ride as a guest, because I had done some stuff for the Navy. I obviously, with my business, I also do work for the Navy. And while at sea, I was seasick, because I'm a landlubber. I just didn't have sea legs. So I was hiding in the sonar area to try and get rid of my seasickness, because it was quiet. It's around the corner, away from the control room. And to be honest, if I got sick, I would have gotten sick on the floor, and nobody would have seen it, and I could clean it up, But I was sitting next to a sonar guy, a kid, and he was looking at his sonar and watching it, and I make small talk with him. But he was, all business, looking at the screen. And all of a sudden, while I had my eyes closed, he yelled for the XO, the executive officer, to come over, and he yelled, con sonar, fast mover. And to me, that woke me right up, and I was thinking, fast mover, that's a torpedo. What are you going to be? I'm going to die out here? Why did I even come on this ship? I shouldn't even come on this boat. And then the executive officer comes around, and he says, what do you got? And the kid points at his trail on his screen. And submarines are quiet, but you know what? On the outside, they're quiet. On the inside, they're a constant hum and drone of machinery. It's a tribute to the builders to actually make all that noise stays inside the hull, never gets out. But it's loud in there. It's noisy, to some extent. You get a constant noise. Well, anyway, I couldn't hear every word the kid said, but I did hear when the executive officer said, okay, well, what do you got? What do you got for speed? And the kid looked at him, worked it out, and looks at him. He says, I get several hundred knots. And he says, check it again. And he did. And then he leaned over to me, and he said, excuse me. And I leaned back, and he looks at the sonar that I was sitting in front of, which I was just, a passerby just sitting there. And he says, yeah, it's confirmed. It's on the other sonar, too, because he had two sonars working, which I didn't even realize because the screen was off. He turned it on, and there it was, So that was freaky. And I realized, that we don't have anything that goes several hundred knots underwater, and neither do the Russians. The biggest thing that the Russians have that goes that fast, and it's not even that fast, is the Skval torpedo. And that's like a steam rocket underwater, and it's the loudest thing in the ocean. You can hear it for thousands of miles, and it only goes in a straight line. It wouldn't be silent, almost silent like this thing was, traveling at several hundred knots. So by confirming that it existed on the other sonar, he shows it wasn't a machine anomaly, something wrong with the sonar. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then later on, when I said to the executive officer, I said, Exec XO, I have some experience with these things. If you'd like, maybe I can help you. He puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, Mr. D'Antonio, you having a good trip? I go, yes, sir. He says, let's keep it that way.
Wow.
And he walks away. Yeah. But the kid asked him what to do with it because he was at a loss because this was something he hadn't seen before. And the executive officer just looked at him and said, log it and dog it. So basically log it and then get rid of it. It never happened.
So it was probably something they had seen before, possibly.
Well, now, if this is your way of me to get me to tell you what I did when I did the next project, I actually had to do a job for the Joint Chiefs. Now, these are Joint Chiefs. These are the big guys down in D.C., right? And I was friendly with a guy who was very important on the Joint Chiefs. He was actually very well. I won't tell you his exact position, but the man, knew everything. He was one of the most important guys on that commission, on that panel of the chiefs. Anyway, I had an occasion to be at his home in Maryland, and I was sitting in the living room with him, and his wife was making some lemonade in the kitchen with my youngest son. And I leaned over to him and I said, Admiral, what can you tell me about the Fast Mover program? And he just looked at me and then he leaned back and he goes, I can't tell you anything about that program, Mark. And he smiled. And I was elated. I mean, a chill ran through me because by saying nothing, he said everything. I was stunned. So there's my story. I'm telling you as I saw it. There's no embellishment, no ads, no. I've only left out detail. I haven't, given you all the detail. But that's what happened. And I can't explain it to this day. And I couldn't get a copy of the trace because those kinds of traces weren't really stored as far as I knew. Maybe they were. I still don't know. But I would love to know more about that. And I wish I could just find all the data on the Fast Mover program.
Yeah, the Shag Harbor incident supposedly had the craft going under the water and clocked and all that. But you rarely hear of, you don't hear of a situation like that, a submarine or anything like that, of course, because I don't think anything, I'm not talking about like a massive cover-up or anything. I just don't think that it would be let out if these things were happening.
Certainly, because, the last thing that anyone wants is to be confronted by something they don't understand that demonstrates superior capability. That's the last thing you want. If you're a captain of a submarine and you're underwater and you see something do a circle around you at 300 knots, and it's like, okay, this is out of my ballpark. I don't even know what to do with this. If you fired a torpedo at it, it's like firing, it's like firing slow motion projectile at it. It wouldn't have any. It would be stepping out of the way. It wouldn't be effective in any way. So you have no defense against it, no offense against it. So what do? You just track them. You track them. You build up a case for figuring out where they are, what they are, and all that. And that's the best you can do. That's my take on it.
Okay, that's it for the free part of the show. Thanks so much for listening. Remember, if you want to listen to the full shows and you can't support us for only $2 or more, all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com during the live show, which is 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com, or the Dark Matter Digital Network on the following day, Thursday, at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Also, one thing I never mentioned here is if you want to join our mailing list, it's right on podcastufo.com. It's an email list sent out once a week with the upcoming guest and the current guest announcing the podcast. That's basically all I send out. So anyway, thanks so much. Next week, we'll be back with either Leslie Kane and Jose Lai or Micah Hanks, one or the other. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.